Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, the award-winning cannabis news podcast brought to you by VoteProPot.com. Here are your hosts, Phil Adams, Jay Britton, and Andrew McCreadies.
3/4 of all veterans say they're interested in cannabis. Wonder why? We're going to talk about that. Former President Obama writes in his memoirs about stiff-arming the pro-cannabis movement. Now, there's a lot to that story. We'll get to that in a moment. And is there such a thing as a marijuana hangover? We're going to discuss that myth or fact, whichever it turns out to be. Jay's got some insights on that. But first, Jay, we're not sure who won the election yet.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm positive.
Who is it? Or what
Weed.
is it?
Mary Jane won the election, bro.
You are absolutely right. In the States, and we said this before, that, and we were very proudly reporting last time that in the states that had pro-cannabis, either adult use and or medical marijuana ballot initiatives, those being Arizona, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota, those initiatives swept. They all passed.
Even two in South Dakota.
Two
medical
in South Dakota.
And adult use.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
In those states, the ballot initiatives ended up getting more pro-cannabis votes. More people voted for cannabis than for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
What? Then Weed should be the president.
Weed should be the fucking president.
That's what I'm saying.
And they also beat out a lot of the what they call the down ballot candidates from both parties. And we're talking about significant margins. For example, in Arizona, they had an adult use proposal. It passed pretty strongly. And I think it had just failed back in 2016, but they passed it again. This time it got 1,951,000 votes and change. Okay. 1.95 million.
Jeez.
Okay. In Arizona, President Trump got 1.65 million. And Joe Biden got 1.68 million as of the latest count.
This week.
We'll see how that holds up. But they're not going to recount the votes for cannabis. Right. That one by a side. We're talking, 300,000 votes.
Wow. Yeah.
More.
Think about that for a second.
Think about that for a second. Yeah.
Let that sink in, and so you're saying, I didn't realize this till you just said it. So all of those states that had initiatives, in each state, the initiative got more votes. The yes initiative got more votes than either Biden or Trump.
Right.
Wow.
Let's go to Mississippi. They had a medical cannabis program on the ballot.
Right.
The voters for the ballot initiative, 774,000 and change. Donald Trump is as opposed to 774 got 747,000. Joe Biden 520,000.
Biden got blown out of the water.
Blown out of the water. The senator, Cindy Hyde Smith, the Republican senator, was reelected with 700,000, 75,000 short of Weed. Her Democratic challenger, Mike Espy, 559,000. So he got his ass whooped by Weed too. So Biden, Trump, and both the Senate candidates got their asses whooped by Weed.
That's a trip when you stop and think about it.
Right.
Montana. So why again is this federally illegal? Explain that to me.
Wow. Now, a voter-approved measure to legalize adult use in Montana, 341,000 versus 244,000 for Joe Biden. And I'm trying to find here how many Trump got, but I don't see it. Trump won the state of Montana.
Right.
But it was almost 100,000 100,000 votes more for the ballot initiative than for Biden for president. The Republican governor was reelected with only 328,000, and his Democratic opponent got 250,000.
Damn.
GOP Senator Steve Daines from Montana got 333,000, also fewer than the 341,000 that voted for weed. And his Democratic challenger, Steve Bullock, got 272,000. And so it just goes down the list. New Jersey, a blue state, voted to legalize cannabis for adult use, overwhelmingly passed.
Yep.
2.637 million. Joe Biden, 2.509 million. Donald Trump, 1.817 million. So both the candidates lost to weed, as did Senator Cory Booker, who won re-election. He's a Democrat. Right. 2.433 thousand. And his Republican challenger, Rikin Mehta, 1.756 thousand. So it was a blowout again.
Well, I think it's official then. Weed is the president.
Weed is the president.
That's
shall I go on?
No.
Or do we get the gist of this?
I think we got it. That's amazing, though. Really, stop and think about that. That's just blows my mind. I didn't realize that.
And what it says very loud and clear is that this is popular across party lines.
Right.
This is no longer just, the liberal left, voting to legalize drugs. This
Not at all.
Not at all. This is the Republicans and Democratic voters alike saying enough of this shit already.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So I mean,
go weed, man.
Go weed.
I voted for it. No, I would have, but it wasn't on the ballot in Maryland.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, that's those are some interesting numbers, man.
Interesting numbers. Kind of a corollary to that. One of the senators who was not up for re-election this year, a GOP senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey. Now, we don't know yet whether the Senate is going to remain in GOP control or not. It looks like it is. If it goes according to the polls, of course they never do, but the runoff elections in Georgia appear to be strongly favoring both the Republican incumbents. And but whether or not it remains in GOP control, Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania has said that he is open to working with his colleagues across the aisle to support the Safe Banking Act. That is, I think, huge. If the Senate, and if he can get Mitch on board, if the Senate,
good luck with that.
Yeah, well,
we'll see.
But if the Senate has a champion in the Republican Party, it was Cory Booker. Not Cory Booker. Yeah. Cory Gardner, the other Cory in the Senate, from Colorado, who lost his reelection bid. But Pat Toomey is perhaps taking up the mantle of the Republican champion for at least the Safe Banking Act, and I think he could have some success with that. He said he would be open to working with Democrats, quote, to pass the Secure and Safe Enforcement Banking Act because he is, quote, sympathetic to the idea that people who are involved in the cannabis industry in an entirely legal fashion ought to be able to have ordinary banking services. And he's absolutely right about that. This business that we're forcing the marijuana industry to be a cash-only industry is nuts.
Well, you got to wonder, too, Phil, after the numbers you just read in your first segment there, how many of these politicians who haven't really spoken up or maybe even were opponents are now looking at these numbers and going, geez, weed beat the shit out of me or my opponent and my opponent. Yeah. Maybe I really need to take a look at this. I mean, let's face it, votes are what these guys are all about besides money. And they're seeing the numbers that came in on the initiatives, the cannabis initiatives, and every state.
And you know that they're seeing these numbers.
Oh, absolutely. They're seeing the numbers. I mean, that's all these guys do all day long is raise money and read polls. So they're definitely seeing those numbers and they're going, oh shit, yeah, maybe
right.
I should.
This train is leaving the station. I better freaking be on it.
Yeah, well, it's like Kurt was saying last week. We had Kurt Dalton on from Cannabis.net, and he was saying the same thing. He thinks that this whole thing is going to go in the first, 3 or 4 months of the.
Yeah, he seemed very optimistic about that. I'm not as optimistic, but I would like to be.
Well, but I understand his point, and this was part of his point, is that the public and the voters have spoken in this election. We don't know what the hell they said about the president necessarily, but they definitely spoke when it came to cannabis, and it's a landslide.
Yeah, so, it is a landslide. That's right. Yeah, and you nailed it. Every other aspect of this election is open to interpretation at this point.
Yeah. Yet to be determined.
Is TBD, but this is not.
It's clear as a bell.
This is the one initiative that went across state lines, and everywhere it was on the ballot, it blew it away.
And this is the first time that's happened because, we've had cannabis on the ballot for years now, 10 years or whatever it's been.
Yep.
And, it's always been 50-50 and the states, came close. Like you said, Arizona and others, even back in the days when Colorado didn't quite get through and other states, it took them a while and it would be, 60-40 didn't pass. Now, man, it's people's minds have changed. They understand it. There's such an understanding of the benefits of this plant. Right. I mean, from a medical standpoint, at least. And people also are saying, it's what is wrong with me doing what I want in my house if I'm not hurting anybody else, and if maybe I don't like to smoke it.
Right.
And stop and think about this for a minute.
It's a little thing that we like to call, what's the word? Liberty? Freedom.
Well, and you got to wonder how many people voted with those numbers that you just read. Overwhelming numbers. How many of those people are not users, Phil?
Oh, probably a significant percentage.
Okay, so these people are voting yes for a reason. And it's not because they want to go buy it, maybe, because of the liberty, the freedom aspect of it. It's like, this is ridiculous.
There are not 1.6 million medical marijuana patients in New Jersey.
I doubt it.
I doubt it.
So that means a whole lot of people went to the polls and pulled the yes lever on cannabis
because it was the right thing to do.
Because it's the right thing to do. And more importantly, possibly, it's gotten to a point now where they understand there isn't a danger with cannabis.
No.
It's not dangerous. It's not going to lead to heroin and rape and murder and that was bullshit. That was complete and total bullshit.
Right. I always think of that scene in Animal House when they're at the professor's house smoking weed and the one kid says,
"Oh yeah,
you sure this isn't going to make me psycho?"
Yep, exactly. No, exactly.
No, it's not going to make you psycho.
well, let me spin
Flounder
this in,
or whatever the fuck his name was.
Let me spin this into another story. And this, I got Caitlin Domingue wrote this for the French Toast, that website. It's a pretty cool website. And it's a survey. And 75% of veterans are interested in cannabis is the title of this article. Right. And it basically deals with post-traumatic stress syndrome. They say that according to some studies, somewhere in between 15 and 20 veterans out of every 100, so 15 to 20% of all veterans who served in Operations Iraqi Freedom or Enduring Freedom have PTSD in any given year. So that's
I'm surprised it's not higher than that.
Yeah, well, that's still a huge number, 15 to 20%. And according to a survey in 2019 conducted by Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the IAVA, 75% of military veterans say they'd consider using either cannabis or a product from cannabis as a treatment option.
Yep.
83% of respondents expressed their support for medical cannabis access, while 63% of participants believe that the Department of Veterans Affairs should allow for research into cannabis as a treatment option. Unfortunately, cannabis federally is obviously still illegal. But not only that, currently physicians who are in any way affiliated with the Department of Veterans Affairs are not allowed to mention cannabis, much less recommend it for their patients.
Isn't that something?
That's ridiculous. I mean, no, so you can be a doctor in a legal state, let's just say Colorado or California, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you have a patient come in and they're suffering from either, chronic pain maybe or PTSD as a result of their service. And they're like, Doc, I don't want to take opiates anymore, man. They're fucking me up. I just don't like it. No. They cannot say, well, let's try cannabis. That's crazy. I mean, that's nuts.
That's just absolutely ridiculous. And we reported a couple of months ago about the lawsuit that actually they wanted to send it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case, but it was a challenge to the constitutionality of Schedule I classification on the grounds that it has no medical use, when there are researchers who were litigants in the case who say, we have documented research evidence that says it helps with it's a viable treatment for PTSD.
Right.
And other, but that's the one that a lot of the veterans signed on who were filed amicus briefs with the court on this, who said this helps.
Right.
This is a medical treatment. And
both patients, doctors, and medical centers that have done preliminary research have all said the same thing. Right.
And it gets to the point where you get this image of the bureaucrats in Washington with their fingers in their ears going, la, 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 I can't hear you. It gets to be a little infantile.
Well, when you stop at the number, that's it for that article. But 75% of veterans, that's a substantial number,
We were also talking about, the idea that marijuana does not make you psycho. Well, I mean, it may have done with me once or twice, but I was probably going to be having an episode anyway.
Yeah. But, well on your way.
But the question is, does medical marijuana cause seniors any cognitive decline as they get older? Now, we see, anyone who has known somebody who has gone through that, dementia. In my case, my mother had Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. Is there any evidence that says that it contributes to that in seniors?
A recent study by Israel's Haifa University School of Public Health found that senior citizens who use cannabis do not show evidence of cognitive decline. Now, I got this out of ganjapreneur.com by T.G. Brandfault, who we cover a lot. He writes a lot of great articles.
Yep.
So the study included 125 cannabis users aged 50 and older, 63 with and 62 without government permission to use cannabis. So I found this article interesting. I'll read on in a second here because we fall into this category, Phil. We are seniors.
We're getting there, yeah. We're getting there.
So we're right there.
I geezed a few times this week. No question about it.
Yeah. And these folks, they've measured their psychomotor reaction, their attention span, their new learning ability, and working memory. All these were tested with different, psychiatric or whatever kind of tests they used.
Sure.
And they tested them while they were under the influence of cannabis and while they were sober. And the results, and it was conducted by Dr. Schnittman and Dr. Galit Weinstein, two of the researchers who conducted the study, noted that while previous studies have clearly shown that medical cannabis can have long-term that on the brain when consumed at a young age. And we've talked about that many times over that we've done. If you're under 21, 24, 25, you really shouldn't be messing with.
Your brain isn't really fully developed until at least 21, sometimes as late as 24, 25. So you should not be using cannabis or alcohol or anything. At least not on a regular basis.
Right. So the researchers said that the findings may reduce concerns among physicians who deal with chronic pain and among patients who suffer from different, effects of the cannabis on their brain function. So that's good news. That's a preliminary study. It was only 125 folks, but Israel is really on top of it, man.
They really are, and it's Dr. I forget his first name, Dr. Machulam, who is the one who first isolated both THC and CBD as compounds. He's like the pioneer.
Yeah, now many more. Many more. But he was the original. He was the one who originally discovered THC,
right?
CBD.
So they've got it on the ball over there. Well, that's very encouraging. So
news. Smoke away, bro.
Smoke
Let's
away.
light one up.
Well, I've beaten you to it already. So no. I think we need to stop here for just one moment, Jay, and recognize that we are missing 1/3 of our triumvirate here.
We are.
And our buddy Andrew is out again this week. He's off. And we are pressing ahead without, it's the addition of his charm and wit and exceeding knowledge on the subject. Yeah. He knows more about this than both of us
combined.
Put
Plus,
together.
I miss his humor.
He just cracks me up. But Andrew is off this week. He should be back next week. And shout out to our buddy Drew.
We miss you, bro.
We'll see you in a week or so.
Hurry back.
But for those of you who are listening to our podcast and wondering where the hell is Drew McCready's, well, he's off this week. So we'll get back to him on the following week.
Let's hope he's here next week. Yeah.
We're talking about the presidential elections and it brings up, this is an article from Marijuana Moment about former President Barack Obama, and according to this article, he wrote in his newly released memoir. It's a book called A Promised Land, just published this week.
The first of 15 volumes, I think. Is that right? 800 pages,
700 plus pages. Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a tome.
And all about his favorite subject, and
the mirror.
Yeah, himself. And no, we kidding.
No, we're just kidding.
But in his book, he talks about how he cut deals with congressional Republicans that allowed him to kind of ignore some of the calls from the folks in his own party for cannabis legalization or other things that he called, quote, less orthodox ideas. And, we can comment all we want to on the orthodoxy of legalizing cannabis, but he wrote in his book, truthfully, quote, he said, just the act of negotiating with Republicans served as a handy excuse to deflect some of the less orthodox ideas that occasionally surfaced from our side of the aisle. And he quotes himself as saying, I'm sorry, Congressman, but legalizing marijuana isn't the kind of stimulus we're talking about here.
Really? Interesting.
So he, and he was never, now, this is coming from, by the way, despite the fact that he is actually the first president who openly acknowledged inhaling.
Yeah, that's
he said, "Of course I had something like, of course I inhaled. That was the point."
Well, I think in fairness to President Obama, it was a different time. 10 years ago,
it sure was. It sure was.
And so politically speaking, I can
the
sort
political
of
groundwork had not been laid.
That's it. And if you just look at the political atmosphere around cannabis today compared to 8 years ago or 10 years ago, man, it's a different world.
Yeah, and I dare say if Barack were in office today, he would be on the pro cannabis side.
I think so.
But it's interesting to point out, as this Marijuana Moment article points out, that Obama actually presided over more raids on state legal dispensaries during his first term in office than George W. Bush did in 2 terms, in 8 years.
No kidding. I didn't realize that.
Right. So it was not just an entirely a sin of omission.
I'd love to hear a reporter ask him about this. I'd love to hear when he's doing this, his book tour.
Book tour, yeah.
I don't think it'll happen because it's not in the forefront of the minds of questions for most of the press. But it would be interesting to hear his thoughts on it. Like, for instance.
Well, and let's face it, the press are very cozy with Barack Obama and the Democrats. So they're not going to do it. They're not going to say much. They're not going to try to raise this kind of concern. But I think you're right. I would love to hear what he'd have to say about it.
I just have a feeling, and one thing that comes to my mind instantly is he had young kids at this time, And
True.
I think it would be hard to argue the fact that President Obama appears to be a very good family man, a very good father.
Sure.
So maybe, that had some influence on his sort of direction with regard to cannabis. That in the political atmosphere was totally different back then. So who knows? Well, yeah, I think it's funny though. One of the other things in his book, Phil, was that he talks about how often he was sneaking into places in the White House to smoke a cigarette. Did you read that?
No, I didn't know that, but I knew he was a smoker and he didn't want to be open about it.
Yeah, so apparently he was sliding away from the Secret Service, like Bill was off getting a Hummer.
Was he going?
And he's sneaking off to get a Ret. So
right.
Whatever.
Yeah, and Jimmy Carter was going up on the roof to get high. So.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
or at least Chip was. Jimmy wasn't.
Chip. I can't imagine that lifestyle, being a president.
I can't imagine it. Now, regarding descheduling, now you know that Joe Biden is not in favor of descheduling.
Right.
And neither was Obama.
Right.
Or at least he wasn't in favor of doing it himself. Now, we've often talked to, and Kurt raised Kurt Dalton on our show last week raised the issue that, if the president wanted to, whether it's Biden or Trump or Obama, he could pick up the phone and basically instruct the DEA to deschedule it.
Deschedule it.
But his policy was basically to defer to the legislative branch. And in an interview with CNN back in 2014, he said, quote, "What is and isn't a Schedule I narcotic is a job for Congress." So, I mean, there is something to be said for that. I mean, it's, laws should be made by the legislative branch and not by the executive branch. But, he did a lot with the phone and the pen, as we said.
Right.
So he could have done that, but he elected not to. And I think primarily, Jay, you're right that it was a different time and a different political environment. So he was making political calculations, as politicians do. You cannot take the politics out of politics. After all,
can't. It's there forever.
Yep. Did you see that movie, The Hangover?
Oh yeah, that's a pretty funny movie.
I like that. Now the sequels to that were just the same thing over again. They weren't nearly as funny. But the first one, I swear to God, I left the theater and I was still laughing my ass off the whole ride home.
That guy coming out of the trunk and
my God,
the tiger, lion, whatever it was.
So toodaloo, motherfucker.
Yeah, that was a pretty funny movie. It caught me off guard. So,
but is there such a thing? Now, they were hungover from alcohol and Rufalin.
Right. Well, I got an article from cannabis.net, and this is by Joseph Billions. And the byline is marijuana hangover, myth or fact? So that's a great question. I mean, does cannabis give you a hangover? And you know what the bottom line of this article is?
Tell us.
It can, but especially, and I can relate to this completely, especially edibles. And there are several reasons why. It's how your body metabolizes it. You'll notice that when you eat, when you partake upon edibles, it takes anywhere from half hour, maybe sometimes up to 2 hours for it to kick in. Well, your body also processes it much slower, in a much slower rate, I should say, than when you smoke it. So generally speaking, and with that said, it can sneak up on you. I can tell you for a fact, as someone who enjoys edibles, that when I eat an edible at night, and I'm relaxing and I'm having a glass of wine, I'm watching some TV with my wife or whatever, I have had a hangover the next day.
Huh.
And
now I have never experienced that.
You haven't? Oh, no, I definitely have.
And I have a half a gummy. So I'm having 5 milligrams of THC.
Yeah, pause.
Hey,
No,
it
just
works for
kidding.
me, man.
I agree. I'm the same way. The problem is, like,
And I sleep like a freaking baby.
Oh, yeah,
And I get up feeling refreshed every morning. So
yeah, no, the problem is if I take a 10, 15, 20 milligrams in the evening, I feel groggy for half the day, the next day. Definitely. I feel it. And the reason is because when you consume edibles, the way it's metabolized, it takes much longer for your body to burn it off. So the bottom line is you're still under the effects to some degree, and that's why you have that feeling of kind of grogginess,
Right.
Kind of the moody thing. The other thing
you say that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, really. The other thing they say that it is can lead to and lend to this issue is that a lot of times when you eat an edible, you don't feel it for a while. So maybe you crack a beer or two, or drink half a bottle of wine,
right? Or hit the vape pen.
And you don't really realize you're doing that. So that's a lot of it. Now they say that smoking cannabis, it's much more difficult to get into a situation where you'll have a hangover the next day because you'd have to smoke so much.
That's
right. And your body burns it off. So you know how it is. If you smoke weed, you get high quickly, but then you also sober up quickly, right? Within a couple hours, you're back to
few hours,
normal. Yeah. And that's not the case with edibles. I partook in a 20 milligram edible about a week ago, and I don't do it that much, but I did. And I'm telling you, I was high for hours, and it lasted a long time for me. So
if you've got something important to do the next morning, you may want to just hit the vape pen and not eat the brownie. It's all good. And either way, even if you have too much, the worst that can happen is you have a rough night. You wake up feeling refreshed.
Hey, it's nothing like a freaking hangover after a martini fest. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I've had a few of those in my life, and that's fucking miserable.
Yeah. I don't. It's not fun.
No, you just can't wait for the day to end so you can go back to bed. That's the worst.
And I was only a victim of that a couple of times in my life, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to drink a lot of liquor for it to stay in my system that long. I mean, the night before my brother's wedding, we were all hitting the tequila pretty hard, and I was one of the groomsmen, and I was on the altar just swaying like a fucking tree.
You don't throw up.
Oh God, I was in rough shape, man. But that, But I have, as an adult, at least, as a respectable adult, I was an adult.
You were a respectable adult?
I was an adult before I became a respectable adult.
Okay, gotcha. Long time before.
Yeah. But I've always been able to know that the next drink I take is going to be too much.
Pretty much.
So I don't want to go there. So it's been lucky for me that I'm able to do that. But to each his own, and enjoy life and drink responsibly. And you know what? Thanksgiving is coming. I think we're going to be off next week now that I'm discussing it, because we record these on Thursday, and if I recall correctly, Thanksgiving is on what? Thursday, right?
I think usually.
I think it's usually on Thursday.
I have to look at my calendar.
Well, Thanksgiving comes around pretty much every year, and it's usually on a Thursday. So we're gonna take off next week. We're going to wish everybody a very warm and happy Thanksgiving. And if you enjoyed the show, we would love if you could take a moment, go on to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating, put in a nice word or two for us. It sure would help us out. You know what else would help us out? If you know some people who might be interested in this podcast and might enjoy it as much as you do, tell a friend about it. Spread the word. Word of mouth is still the most potent force in all of marketing. So we want to encourage you all to get out there and talk about Vote Pro Podcast and how much fun you have listening to it. What else, Jay?
Send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com, and we have a message line. You can reach us there at 240-257-2441. We'd love to get a call. Tell us what you think. Give us an idea for a segment. Just maybe throw something out there that we can talk about on the air a little bit. So we'd love to hear from you on that.
Right. And I'm going to step in and take Andrew's role this time, because, of course, Andrew's off this week. And let you know that, we have lots more that we cover than just what we see or what you hear on the podcast that we cover on our social networking platforms. So check us out. Go on to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and or LinkedIn, and just do a search for, wait for it, Vote Pro Pot.